New program. Okay. Are we going? Oh. Hi, this is Two Blondes and a Brokerage, and today we have Dave Bleesmer with us, and we're going to talk about a new program that is going to be awesome for a lot of buyers in the Denver metro area. So Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
You got it. So before I talk specifics on this particular program, I do want to talk about how it compares to your typical down payment assistance program for an FHA or conventional mortgage. So historically, what takes place on an underwriting process for a down payment assistance program is the buyer has to qualify within a certain FICO range, and then they also have to qualify within a certain income limit. And some of these programs have income limits that are specific to only the applicant on the mortgage, and other programs are specific to the income for the household. So, long story short, in the past, you could have somebody that was under 80% of the area median income and potentially qualify for assistance up to 4% of their mortgage amount that could go towards their down payment and closing costs. Now, the difference with this specific program is the FICO range is a little bit lower than typical. So as opposed to your typical 620 FICO range, the minimum FICO score has to be at least 600. Some of these programs have no income caps for the applicant. And the other feature on this particular program that is not allowed on historic down payment assistance programs is the buyer can also qualify using a cosigner. So the combination of having an allowed cosigner with no income cap is going to open up a lot more flexibility for buyers that may have otherwise been locked out of the market, either due to the constraints on their income or the fact that maybe they couldn't qualify with a cosigner. This program is available as of today, and the other feature about this particular program is the down payment assistance portion is based on the purchase price of the home, anywhere from 3.5% to 5% of the purchase price, as opposed to being capped at 4% of the mortgage loan amount. So in these scenarios, you could really have a buyer come in to potentially buy the home with no minimum cash requirement from their own funds. So it's going to open up quite a bit of potential here for first-time buyers that may have otherwise been strained and potentially edged out of the existing housing market.
Okay, Dave, so a few things to clarify. When you say FICO, can you explain how you come up with a FICO score? And then when you talk about cosigners, why might someone need a cosigner?
Great question. So when it comes to FICO scores, this is sometimes a confusing topic for consumers. The reason why is for lending purposes, lenders are going to look at your TransUnion, your Equifax, and your Experian credit bureaus. Out of those three credit bureaus that are polled, the lender's going to use the middle score out of those three. Now, to make this even more confusing, there's different score models that are derived for different purposes. So for consumer purposes, what you're probably looking at is a FICO score model 7, 8, or 9, which are the newer algorithms that the bureaus use when calculating that score. When it comes to lending, they're going to be the older scores, typically a score model 2 or 4. So what you see as a consumer on consumer-driven sites like Credit Karma, for example, it's not going to be the same exact score your lender might see, but it is going to be in that range. So for the FICO score, you'll always want to make sure that you do a formal mortgage loan application and verify that middle score that the lender is looking at. Now, when it comes to cosigners, in the past, where first-time buyers might struggle is in the budget or asset complications of the loan. So, for example, there are debt-to-income ratio requirements on every single loan program. The general way that you calculate a debt-to-income ratio is you take the annual gross income being earned by the applicant, divide that annual figure by 12 months, and then take that monthly figure and multiply that by 45% to 50% depending on the loan program. Now, in that scenario, when you have that 45 or 50% of your monthly gross income determined, your allowed housing expense has to fit within that number, as well as any other payments that you currently make on a credit report. So if there's any auto loans, student loans, credit cards, etc., all of those payments have to fit into that specific ratio, including the future proposed housing payments. So if you are in a position where maybe your income alone doesn't put you into that category, but say, for example, you have a student loan that you know is going to be paid off in 2 years, and you're expecting an income raise in the next 6 months or less. All of these things that you might take into account as a consumer by deriving your own personal comfort level and budget, those things can't necessarily be taken into account from an underwriting perspective. So that's where a cosigner could join the application with you, where the additional applicant does not intend to occupy the home with you. They're just simply signing on the mortgage application to bring in the additional income and credit qualification to make sure that debt to income ratio is balanced.
Awesome. So what else would you like to tell us about this program?
The only other thing to mention with any first-time buyer program, they all require the fact that the buyer takes a home buyer education course. Some of these courses, depending on the program, are done online and they're available 24/7. Other of these courses now are required to be done face-to-face, and sometimes these courses might be weeks or even months out to schedule. So anybody that's going to be a first-time buyer and they're considering getting into the purchase process or pre-approval process, I would suggest maybe engage that homebuyer course much sooner than later, because those course certificates are always going to be available and they won't expire, typically for anywhere from 7 to 12 months. So you could do a course certificate and take that homebuyer class well before you're doing a formal mortgage pre-approval. And they're all free of charge. Or I should say most of these courses are free of charge. So the sooner you're kind of taking that homebuyer course, which are all taught by nonprofit agencies, the sooner you're going to be kind of one step ahead of the game.
And will that ever affect a closing? Let's say they didn't know that they could do it 6 months before. You get them under contract and it's required, but they're booked out 4 months. How does that affect the closing or the loan on that specific deal?
It's a great question. If they were in a situation where they couldn't have a homebuyer course certificate available prior to the closing date, they wouldn't be able to use that specific down payment assistance program to close on the loan. They'd have to come up with an alternative.
So it's important to get them talking to you or another lender way ahead of time. That way we have some leeway if that does end up happening.
100%. Timing is critical with everything in that process.
And then my last question for this specific program and for first-time home buyers is most first-time home buyers don't have great credit, or they don't know what they need to do to better their credit. I know you mentioned Credit Karma, but is there another avenue that people should be kind of monitoring to help to build that credit better?
It's a great question. It's difficult, I think, for consumers to have access to applications or tools that would give them a what-if scenario about changes you could do on your credit report and what impact that has on your potential FICO score change. The great thing is, pretty much all lenders have access to this rescore data input from the credit bureaus. So once an initial application is pulled for a mortgage, that lender can reach out to TransUnion, Experian, Equifax, etc., and absolutely obtain real data as to what changes can impact that FICO score, whether it's paying down certain accounts, maybe paying off a collection account, maybe establishing more credit, etc. So the sooner they get into that formal application process, the sooner they would know what changes they can do to potentially change that FICO score.
That's super helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave, and thank you so much for talking to us about this program today. We're excited to see all the clients that we can help with this.
Yes.
Yes.